Hey guys, tonight we step out into the kind of cold that makes your eyelashes crisp over before you've even had the chance to regret your life choices. You're standing at the edge of a medieval village, foggy breath swirling, boots already sinking into half-frozen mud, and the winter you're about to experience is the sort that doesn't care who you are or what your plans were. The wind nips at your cheeks with that smug attitude winter always has, and before long you realize a tiny, unwelcome truth. You probably won't survive this. But hey, that's the fun of bedtime history, right? So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're settling in, drop your location and the local time in the comments, because I love seeing where everyone is tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You feel winter's first bite long before the first heavy snowfall. It begins as a whisper in the field's dew that doesn't soften after sunrise, soil that stiffens under your boots, a sharpness in the air that even your thickest cloak can't quite ignore. Your daily rhythm is still the same, sure, but every step carries a quiet urgency, as if the earth itself is warning you that the easy days are gone. The sun, that lazy roommate of the medieval year, starts waking up later and calling it quits embarrassingly early. You blink twice and suddenly it's twilight again. One mainstream historical fact woven into this haze is that medieval winters could hit with startling severity, especially during the centuries loosely associated with the so-called Little Ice Age, when colder temperatures made growing seasons shorter and survival trickier. But for you, here and now, all you know is that everything feels like it's tightening light, warmth, time, even your patience. As you trudge toward your small timber-framed home, you can't help but notice how the village mood shifts. People walk faster, speak more quietly, and hunch their shoulders as though trying to fold into themselves. It's not fear, exactly just a kind of collective bracing. Doors creak closed earlier, smoke curls from chimneys with new determination. A sleepy dog refuses to chase chickens, because even the animals know winter is not the season for unnecessary cardio. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers genuinely felt a deep spiritual dread as winter arrived, or if they simply accepted it as one more cyclical inconvenience, like taxes, or that one neighbor who insists his goose is just affectionate. Still, the cold has its own personality, and it's not shy about introducing itself. One morning, you wake to find the water basin inside your home, skinned with a thin layer of ice, sparkling like a cracked mirror. Indoors. That's when you realize winter has gone from polite nudge to full-blown passive-aggressive housemate. You breathe out, and your breath forms a ghostly cloud. For the first time, you wonder if you should start rationing not just food, but optimism. The quirky tidbit that sticks to your mind, mostly because the village miller insists on repeating it every year, is that some people long ago believed winter's bite came from invisible frost sprites nibbling at exposed skin. You pat your face, just in case, and feel mildly reassured that if sprites are involved, at least someone is enjoying themselves. The frost deepens as days pass, and your daily chores take on a heavier quality. Carrying wood becomes less of a task, and more of a fight against stiff limbs that refuse to cooperate. You notice that the path to the well grows slick, and even though medieval shoes are about as slip-resistant as wet soap, you try anyway, tiptoeing like a reluctant acrobat. The joke the villagers like to repeat half serious, half comforting is that if you haven't fallen at least 3 times before midwinter, you're not participating properly. Your body reacts in its own primitive way. Your fingertips ache, your nose stays perpetually cold, and your legs begin to feel like wooden planks you're borrowing. But despite this, there's a strange sense of camaraderie in the air. Everyone who passes you gives a knowing nod, the kind that says, "Yep, we're all cold and miserable together," which is oddly soothing. Misery does love company, especially when it's bundled in wool and trudging uphill. You can't help thinking back to the final days of autumn, when the village bustled with frantic preparation. Those warm afternoons felt infinite at the time, but now, in the crisp bite of early winter, they feel like scenes from a dream. You remember helping to gather the last root vegetables, stacking firewood until your arms throbbed, and sealing jars of whatever you could preserve, including that one suspicious pot of pickled turnips that everyone quietly hopes won't be necessary. The work felt endless then, but now you understand it was only the opening act. What strikes you most is the soundscape of the season. Summer was noisy, children shouting, oxen groaning, merchants arguing about whether a single coin is Too much to ask. Winter arrives like someone turned the entire world's volume knob down. Footsteps muffled, voices hushed. The occasional distant crack of ice shifting in a pond, it feels cinematic. If cinema existed yet. You walk through this softened world and breathe in air so cold it bites your throat but clears your mind, like nature's own questionable peppermint tea. And yet, despite the chill, there's a tenderness to early winter. As you approach your home, you see the faint glow of the hearth through the shutter cracks. You smell smoke, wood, peat, maybe a hint of juniper if you're lucky. The scent clings to your clothes, your hair, your bedding, basically, everything you own. But in this season, smelling like a slightly burned forest is considered attractive. You push open the door and duck inside, letting the warmth wrap around you. Your joints loosen, your face thaws, and though you know the months ahead will only grow harsher, the present moment feels survivable. Winter has taken its first bite, but you're still standing. You don't get more than a few breaths of warmth before the reality of winter preparation taps you on the shoulder like an overbearing supervisor. The moment that faint comfort settles into your bones, you remember there's still stockpiling to finish because winter may have taken its first bite, but it's about to start chewing with enthusiasm. So you pull your cloak tighter, sigh dramatically, which is your new favorite hobby, and step back into the dim afternoon light, where survival lurks behind every underprepared larder. You make your way toward the storage sheds behind the house, boots crunching over frost-stiffened grass. To survive the season, you have to build layers of security, wood stores, root cellars, smoked meats, and you need enough of them to last until the world stops behaving like a vengeful ice dragon. A mainstream historical fact slips through your thoughts. Medieval households often relied on meticulous autumn preservation because winter didn't just mean cold, it meant scarcity. Once the fields froze, there were no fresh crops, no sudden surprises of abundance. Whatever you had now was what you were stuck with. So, you do the math, realize you've never been good at math, and simply decide to gather as much as humanly possible. Your first stop is the woodpile. It's a towering, lopsided monument to both human persistence and questionable stacking skills. You're supposed to add more logs to it, but the pile is leaning like it's trying to whisper secrets to the ground. You approach anyway, knowing full well it might collapse like your hopes for an early spring. You swing the axe carefully, because last winter you almost embedded it in your own foot and split a few stubborn rounds. Splinters fly, your hands sting, and for a moment you feel oddly powerful, like a lumberjack but colder, hungrier, and with worse shoes. A quirky tidbit flickers in your memory. Some medieval households hung herbs near the woodpile because they believed certain plants scared away mischievous spirits that liked to tangle firewood or extinguish flames. You look up at the dusty bundle of dried rosemary over your own shed door and wonder if it's there for spirits or just because it makes the place smell less like damp despair. You carry the wood inside, stacking it neatly near the hearth where it'll actually dry. You're halfway through your second armload when the village baker ambles by, cheeks flushed from oven heat, and calls out, "Better stock twice what you think you need. Winter always eats more than we do." You can't tell if he's being philosophical or just blaming the season for his own snack habits. Next, you head toward the root cellar, which is essentially a cold underground pantry with the ambiance of a crypt. The door creaks open dramatically because of course it does, and you descend the steps into the earthen coolness where your future meals are quietly waiting for their turn to shine. It's dim, it's chilly, and it smells like soil, turnips, and mild existential reflection. Inside, baskets of carrots, parsnips, and onions fill the shelves. You run your fingers along the tops, checking for softness, rot, or anything that looks like it's plotting mutiny. You adjust a few cloth coverings and sigh with relief. Nothing has gone slimy yet. There are jars of pickled vegetables, crocks of fermenting cabbage, and that one questionable jar whose contents have separated into layers that science hasn't named. You decide to ignore it. That's future you's problem. You pull from memory something you overheard at the tavern a few nights ago, because gossip is the medieval version of cable television. Someone mentioned that historians still argue whether certain villages used communal storehouses as a form of emergency safety net, or whether that idea is romantic exaggeration by later writers who wanted medieval people to seem more cooperative than they actually were. From what you've seen of your neighbors arguing over firewood, you'd vote exaggeration. Once your inventory check is done, you go to the smoking shed, a structure that manages to be both incredibly useful and deeply suspicious. As you open the door, a wave of fragrant, slightly acrid smoke curls out, carrying the scent of fish, pork, and whatever experiment the butcher swore would turn out fine this time. You poke at the hanging strips of meat, the glistening fish, the sausages aging like slow, savory time capsules. Smoking food isn't just tradition, it's life insurance. Without it, winter meals would devolve into a bleak parade of cold vegetables and disappointment. Of course, every village has its own philosophy about stockpiling. Some families tuck away so much that their floors groan under the weight of future dinners. Others adopt a more optimistic approach, relying on the hope that winter can't be as bad as last year, even though winter is absolutely always worse than last year. This is a universal rule, like gravity or the fact that medieval shoes will never be comfortable. By midday, the snow starts falling again, light, lazy flakes that don't quite commit to anything. You tilt your head back and let them melt on your nose, feeling for a second like a carefree child instead of the slightly stressed adult carrying half the village's winter anxiety on your shoulders. But then a flake drifts down the back of your collar and you remember exactly why winter deserves no trust. Back inside the house, you lay out everything that still needs doing, salting the last cuts of meat, repairing the roof that always leaks in January, mending the heavy blanket with holes so mysterious that you're convinced mice formed a tiny rebellion. The list feels endless, but there's also something grounding about it. The rhythm of preparation, the repetition of chores, the quiet hope that you can outsmart the season. These things keep your mind steady. You sit near the hearth, warming your hands, watching sparks jump like fireflies trying to remember summer. And even though the work is far from finished, you feel a little more ready. Winter may be sharpening its teeth, but you're building your defenses one log, one turnip, one jar of questionable pickles at a time. The hearth crackles in front of you, that small but stubborn patch of warmth that insists on being the center of your entire winter universe. You settle closer, because at this point, you orbit the hearth like a sleepy planet. Everything you need, heat, light, food, morale, seems to hinge on this one glowing spot, and you treat it accordingly. Hovering with the protective intensity of someone guarding the last warm cookie on earth. You stretch your hands toward the flames, feeling the prickling heat return to your fingers, and you can't help thinking that the hearth isn't just a part of the house, it is the house. The funny thing is, the hearth doesn't care about your affection. It's moody, temperamental, and quick to punish you for even the smallest mistake. Add wood too late, and it sulks into embers. Add wood too early, and it belches smoke like it's trying to summon a dragon. This is the medieval version of temperature control, a highly personal relationship with fire, featuring negotiation, mild resentment, and the occasional surprise burn. You shuffle the logs with the iron poker, trying to find that perfect balance of air, flame, and hope. A mainstream historical fact drifts through your mind. In many medieval homes, especially among ordinary villagers, the hearth burned almost constantly through winter. It wasn't because people loved ambience, it was because relighting a fire from scratch was a dreadful ordeal. And with only flint, steel, and whatever dry kindling you managed to protect from dampness, one failed spark could ruin your whole day. So instead, you and your neighbors coax your fires like fragile pets, feeding them little bits of wood and whispering politely at them to stay alive. You lean back and watch the flames lick upward, casting a flickering orange glow on the walls. Your home isn't big, just a single main room with rough wooden beams overhead, but in winter, it feels tighter, smaller, more intimate. Every sound is amplified. The crackle of the fire, the soft sigh of wind creeping through the shutters, the dull clunk of someone outside dropping a bucket. You swear you even hear the mice discussing real estate options within your floorboards. There's a quirky tidbit you once heard from the local herbalist. Some people used to toss certain herbs into the fire, not just for scent, but because they believed it kept away winter spirits who slipped through the smoke. Whether it worked or not, the idea stuck with you, so now you occasionally cast dried lavender into the flames. It makes the house smell nice, sure, but more importantly, it gives you the smug satisfaction of feeling like you're participating in protective magic. Hey, you'll take whatever psychological advantage you can get. Cooking on the hearth becomes its own winter ritual. You swing the iron pot closer to the heat and give the stew a slow stir. It's mostly root vegetables because winter, but you did manage to sneak in a sliver of smoked pork, which feels like a personal triumph. The scent fills the room, warm and earthy, promising comfort even if the taste ends up being vegetable surprise, again. You dip a wooden spoon in and take a cautious sip. It's hot enough to scald your tongue instantly, but somehow, your brain never learns. You lean back, wincing, and mutter something that is still technically PG-13. The hearth isn't just for cooking, though. It's drying rack, crafts corner, mini laundry, fix-it station, and the only place where your boots have a chance of not freezing solid overnight. You hang your cloak nearby, letting it steam gently. You prop your gloves on a stone to warm up. You even lay your damp socks close enough to toast, but far enough that they don't become flambe footwear, a balancing act you learned the hard way last year. As the fire snaps, your mind drifts to the larger world beyond your home. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers spent more time indoors during winter, or if that's just modern people projecting their desire to hibernate onto the past. From your perspective, winter definitely pushes you indoors, but not because you're avoiding work. Plenty of chores still await outside. It's just that the hearth becomes this irresistible, gravitational pull. Even the animals linger near the doorway in hopes of catching stray warmth. You glance toward the single small window, its shutters drawn tight against the cold. Every now and then, a draft sneaks through, brushing your neck like winter, tapping you with one icy finger. You press the shutter closed with your palm and hope the wind gets bored. Behind you, the room is a patchwork of shadows. The fire illuminates your tools, the weaving loom waiting for your hands, the stool you keep meaning to mend, the basket of wool that somehow always needs more carding. Everything feels both still and expectant, as if winter has pressed pause on the world but left a whisper of tasks behind. You take a long breath and listen. That's another thing the hearth does. It slows your senses. You focus more on smell, on sound, on the way warmth moves through air. You can practically track which side of your body is heated and which still feels winter's bite. You rotate slightly, letting the fire warm your knees now, then your feet, then your shoulders. It's a little like trying to evenly toast a marshmallow, except the marshmallow is you, and the stakes are much higher. You shift a log, and sparks drift upward like tiny stars escaping. For a moment, you feel mesmerized, almost lulled. The hearth invites that sort of trance, the kind that makes time slippery. You've probably sat here for 10 minutes, or 50, or a week. Winter loves to blur the hours. You lean closer again, but you're careful, because everyone in the village has at least one story about someone singeing their eyebrows off. Or worse, falling asleep too close and waking up with the medieval version of a bad tan. You smirk, thinking of Tomas, the cooper, whose beard still hasn't fully grown back after last year's incident. He insists it was a controlled experiment. Nobody believes him. The stew bubbles, the fire hums. You shift, stretch, exhale, and slowly you realize the hearth has done its job. You're warm enough to face the cold again, or at least warm enough to pretend you have the courage to. You poke the fire one more time, feeling the satisfaction of seeing flames leap up in response. The hearth may be demanding, but when it works, it works. And in a medieval winter, that's the closest thing you get to luxury. You wake before dawn. Well, wake might be generous. It's more like you regain enough consciousness to realize your feet are cold, the blanket has migrated to the floor, and someone outside is already doing something noisy with a bucket. Dawn hasn't actually arrived yet. It's merely thinking about it. The sky is a deep, sleepy blue, and the air inside your home is so cold that your breath drifts upward in pale little clouds. You sit up slowly, joints cracking like you're made of old furniture, and try to remember whether medieval mornings are supposed to feel this personal. Your first thought is the same every winter morning. I don't want to do this. Your second thought is, too bad. You haul yourself upright, shivering as your toes hit the floor. You have chores waiting, chores made infinitely worse by the fact that the cold has seeped into everything. Your clothes feel like chilled armor. Your boots feel like they've been storing snowflakes since the night before. Even the air feels resistant, as if it's saying, no, stay in bed. No need to be productive. You wish you could listen. You poke the hearth embers from last night, coaxing them back to life. A flame flickers up, slow and reluctant. You're right there with it, but little by little, the fire grows, and with each inch of warmth, the world feels less like a punishment. You pull on your thickest layers: wool tunic, second wool tunic, cloak, hood, gloves that used to be soft before winter bullied them, and stomp your feet a few times to wake them up. Then you push open the door and step outside into the freezing dawn. The cold slaps you immediately. Not a polite tap, an actual slap, the kind that makes you gasp and consider filing a complaint with the season's manager. The frost coats everything: the ground, the shutters, the bucket by the door, even the thatched roof glinting under the faintest hint of sunrise. Your boots crunch in the snow, and you feel each sound echo. through your bones. Animals need tending, so you trudge toward the barn. A mainstream historical fact floats through your mind. Livestock was the lifeline of medieval households, meaning their survival was just as important as yours. If the cows don't make it, you don't make it. If the chickens freeze, so do your breakfasts. So you're not just doing chores, you're keeping the entire household alive, including your future meals. The barn door groans open as though offended. Inside, the animals look at you with a mixture of boredom and expectation. The cow lets out a low, unimpressed moo that feels vaguely judgmental. The chickens rustle around, annoyed that you're late, even though the sun hasn't bothered to clock in yet. You feed them, break the ice in their water trough with a sturdy stick, and wonder for the 20th time why winter water ice is always 10 times harder than regular water ice. Nature is showing off. As you work, your fingers stiffen despite the gloves, and you stop every few minutes to blow warm air into your hands. The milk pail feels colder than metal should legally be allowed to feel. The rope you tie around the hay bales crackles with frost. The cow's breath fogs the air, and for a moment you lean into the warm steam like you're trying to borrow a tiny cloud of heat. The cow shifts away, unimpressed. You step back outside, shivering again. The world is brighter now, the sun still low, but rising reluctantly as if it, too, would rather be under a blanket. The sky is washed with pale gold, the kind of light that promises warmth but refuses to deliver any. You spot your neighbor trudging across his yard, bundled so heavily he looks like someone attempting medieval winter cosplay. He raises a hand in greeting, then immediately drops it, because exposed skin is a terrible idea. You make your way toward the well next, because water is a cruel winter chore. The rope is stiff, the bucket is stiff, you are stiff, everything is stiff, except the ice trying to murder you. You lower the bucket, hear the splash, haul it back up, and feel your arms protest with a level of drama usually reserved for tragic ballads. You spill only a little water on your boots, which instantly regret existing. Halfway home, you slip not enough to fall, but enough to reenact that moment where your life flashes before your eyes, and all you see is turnips. You regain your balance, and look around quickly to ensure nobody saw. They didn't, except the goose. The goose definitely saw, and it looks smug. You reach your house again, set the water inside, and breathe through your scarf until you regain feeling in your face. This is the part of winter mornings you never get used to, that sense that the world is testing you, pushing you, daring you to quit. And you're not even halfway through your chores yet. A quirky tidbit floats into your mind. In some regions, people believed that whistling during early morning winter chores could attract mischievous spirits who would spoil the day's work. You don't know if that's true, but you also don't whistle. You're not taking chances. You have enough problems without poltergeist chickens. You head back outside to check the tools, hose, axes, shovels, and make sure they haven't frozen together into one super tool you can't use. You chip ice off handles, test the weight of the axe, and mentally rank every chore in order of difficulty, starting with breaking ice and ending with anything indoors near a fire. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers considered winter mornings the hardest part of the season, or whether the real struggle came later, when food ran thin. But as you wipe your nose on your sleeve, because you're practical, not glamorous, and take another step onto the brittle ground, you're convinced. This is the hardest part. This numb-fingered, breath-frosting, barely light chore marathon. But there's a rhythm to it. A strange comfort. The quiet of dawn settles around you, soft, cold, steady. The sky lightens. The fire waits inside. You feel your muscles warming with effort, your breath puffing in steady clouds, your thoughts settling into something calm. It's cold, it's brutal, it's exhausting, but you're doing it. You trudge back toward the house, every step crunching, every muscle protesting, and yet somehow, despite everything, you feel a small flicker of pride. You survived another freezing dawn. You peel off your outer cloak as you step back inside, feeling that tiny pocket of warmth you've earned through sheer stubbornness. It's not much, your home is still cold enough to make your breath fog, but compared to the icy dawn outside, it feels almost luxurious. Almost. You stretch your fingers toward the hearth, grimacing as the prickly sensation of thawing fingertips reminds you that pain is, apparently, how winter says, good morning. Once your joints start cooperating again, you begin the next great challenge of the day, dressing yourself in layers that will hopefully keep you from becoming a medieval popsicle. Winter clothing isn't about fashion, it's about survival. And while the people of your era aren't exactly gifted in the art of comfortable textiles, they are extremely committed to the concept of piling on so much fabric that mobility becomes a fond memory. Your first layer is linen, soft, relatively clean, but currently as cold as a frog in a snowbank. You shiver your way into it anyway. Next comes wool, scratchy wool, coarse wool. Wool that feels like someone knitted a sweater out of determination and tiny needles. You rub your arms and try to ignore the familiar itch crawling across your skin. This is normal. This is fine. This is winter. A mainstream historical fact flickers through your mind as you wrap the long woolen tunic around your torso. Despite its itchiness, wool was one of the most reliable insulators available. It kept warmth in, even when damp, which was crucial in a world where damp was the unofficial seasonal flavor. Medieval folk didn't love the scratchiness, but they loved freezing to death even less. So, wool won every time. You tug on your second tunic, yes, your second one, and feel your range of motion shrink until you resemble someone trying to hug a barrel. Then comes your cloak, a thick, patched thing that smells faintly of smoke, mud, and triumph. It's heavy, but heavy means warm, and warm means you can go outside without crying. You wrap a long woolen scarf around your neck, tuck your chin into it like a turtle seeking inner peace, and slide your feet into tightly woven hose. Over that go your boots, sturdy leather, softened by years of wear, and several experimental waterproofing methods, including one involving goose fat that absolutely did not work. You lace them tightly, because the alternative is snow pouring inside anytime winter feels mischievous. One quirky tidbit you once heard in the tavern crosses your mind. Some medieval folks stuffed their shoes with straw for extra insulation. You've tried it. It works surprisingly well, unless the straw shifts, at which point your foot feels like it's being gently stabbed by a very polite plant. Layered up, you test your mobility. You bend, you creak, you attempt to lift your arms and discover that you can either raise your elbows or breathe deeply, but never both at the same time. This is the winter trade-off. You accept it. The gloves come next. They're thick but clumsy, turning your hands into the least coordinated versions of themselves. You try to tie a knot with them, on it's hopeless. You try to pick up a needle, laughable, but they keep your hands from freezing solid, so you forgive them. Mostly, historians still argue whether everyday medieval people wore multiple layers regularly or reserved heavy layering for the coldest days. But based on your current situation, where you look like a walking pile of laundry, you strongly suspect they layered whenever the temperature dared to feel rude. You turn toward the polished bronze plate hanging on the wall, a makeshift mirror, and catch sight of yourself. You blink. You stare. You resemble a travel-sized woolen mountain with a face poking out. You let out a soft laugh that fogs the plate. This is winter chic. This is peak medieval fashion. If you squint, you might even look heroic. Or exhausted. Probably exhausted. You pull your hood up and tie it beneath your chin, feeling the familiar pressure of the wool framing your face. It's cozy, even comforting, like wearing a portable cave. When the wind hits, this hood will be your best friend. When snow starts falling sideways because winter loves chaos, your hood will keep it out of your ears, your eyes, and your soul. You step outside again, feeling the world greet you with a cold so sharp it almost feels impressed by your outfit. The layers help. They really do. But cold has a way of sneaking into seams and cracks, exploring tiny openings like a curious cat. The wind tugs at your cloak, snowflakes cling to your scarf, frost forms on your eyelashes in the time it takes to blink. But you're warm, or warmish, warm adjacent. As you walk toward your next task, you feel the weight of your clothing shift around you, swishing softly. You can barely feel your limbs, but that's part of the charm. The cold stings your cheeks, but the wool protects the rest of you. You trudge forward, feeling oddly powerful, like someone armored not in metal, but in fabric, patience, and mild irritation. And these layers? They'll become your constant companions. Indoors, outdoors, doing chores, eating meals, trying to sleep, and realizing wool blankets are scratchier than small regrets. You'll spend the next several months bundled so thoroughly that your actual body becomes a rumor. But for now, as you crunch through the snow with your cloak billowing behind you and your boots, gripping the frozen earth, you feel ready. Not comfortable, but ready. Winter is harsh, but you've wrapped yourself in everything you can find: wool, fur, resolve, and the faint hope that spring will eventually show up. You pull your scarf a little higher, tuck your chin a little deeper, and press on. You step back out into the pale, stubborn daylight, wrapped in every layer you own, but as the hours slide by, you notice the light fading far earlier than feels natural. The day has barely begun, yet already the shadows stretch longer than a medieval sermon. Winter doesn't just take warmth, it steals time. It narrows your world into a tight loop of dim mornings, long nights, and that vague sense that you've been awake for 3 days, even though it's only mid-afternoon. You look up at the sky, a washed-out grey that seems undecided about whether it wants to snow or simply judge you from above, and you feel the weight of the season settle on your shoulders like yet another wool cloak. The shortness of the days is something you can't quite get used to. One moment you're ladling out a bowl of watery stew, and the next the sun is already sinking, leaving the world in bruised purples and soft metallic blues. Even the chickens seem confused, climbing onto their roosts early as if they've given up negotiating with the sun. A mainstream historical fact comes to mind. Medieval Europeans marked winter's deep darkness with rituals, feasts, and of course candles. Candles were precious though, not the sort you'd casually burn just because you want cozy vibes. These were utilitarian flames, serious flames, the kind of flames you used sparingly because you needed to see, not because you wanted ambiance. You head back inside, shutting the door firmly behind you to seal in the little warmth the hearth has managed to muster. The fire's glow flickers across the walls, breathing a soft, warm heartbeat into the room. You light a tallow candle, a squat, slightly greasy thing that smells faintly of animal fat, and set it beside you. The flame wobbles, then steadies, casting just enough illumination to remind you why humans have spent thousands of years obsessing over fire. With the outside world swallowed in darkness so early, evening becomes an oddly elastic stretch of time. Too long to fill easily, too short to be truly restful. You sit near the hearth, pulling your cloak around your shoulders, and listen to the quiet hush of the night settling in. At first, the stillness feels peaceful, almost sacred, but soon you sense that under the calm is a kind of restless waiting nature, pausing, conserving, holding its breath. You shift on the low wooden bench and glance around the room. Shadows jump across the walls every time the fire cracks. Sometimes they move in ways that make you question whether the house is haunted. It's probably not. Probably. You remember a quirky tidbit your neighbor once whispered. That long winter nights were the prime time for telling stories of spirits, strange creatures, and unseen watchers wandering through the dark. Not because people believed them wholeheartedly, though some did, but because stories helped keep the mind occupied when the wind howled at the shutters like it had something to say. You toss another log onto the fire. Sparks leap up like tiny golden insects escaping into the night. The warmth deepens, and the room feels a little less hollow. You roll your shoulders, listening to the familiar creak of your winter layers, and settle into the rhythm of the season. Slow breaths, slow thoughts, slow everything. Winter forces patience. Winter demands it, really. Even the simplest task, mending a torn hem, sweeping the floor, carving a new wooden spoon, fills the long dark hours with just enough purpose to keep your mind from unraveling. You pick up a spindle and begin twisting wool into thread. The movement is repetitive, soothing, almost hypnotic. You watch your hands, work, turn, pull, twist, spin, and feel the heaviness of the day. Ease just enough for your shoulders to drop a fraction. This is the kind of quiet winter labor that shapes the season. Probably not glamorous, definitely not exciting, but grounding in a way you didn't appreciate until the cold took over everything. Historians still argue whether winter nights were actually this quiet, or if we romanticize them, because we now live in a world that never goes fully dark. Some say medieval winters were alive with noise, crackling fires, shifting ice, animals shifting in the barn. Others insist the nights must have felt silent and endless. You sit there, listening to the soft pop of sap in the firewood and the distant hoot of an owl, and think the truth is probably somewhere in the middle. You lean back, allowing the spindle to rest in your lap. Your eyelids droop, the warmth of the fire lulling you. But you're not ready for sleep yet. Winter nights are long enough without going to bed, at whatever o'clock this is supposed to be. Instead, you reach for your mug of warm herbal tea, mint, maybe, or fennel, something earthy and vaguely medicinal, and take a slow sip. The steam brushes your face, warming your nose. It tastes faintly bitter, but comforting, like drinking the idea of relaxation rather than actual relaxation. You poke at the fire again, partly to keep it going, partly because the quiet scratches at your nerves. A shiver runs down your back, just a chill, you tell yourself, Just the cold settling in. Definitely not ghosts. Probably. You tug your cloak a little tighter and hum under your breath. Not quite a song, just enough sound to keep the silence company. As the hours stretch on, conversations drift through your thoughts, ones you've overheard in the tavern, stories people swap when the nights get long and the ale gets warm. Someone claimed they saw lights in the forest last winter, dancing between the trees like tiny lanterns. Another swears the wind carries voices when the temperature drops below freezing. You roll your eyes, remembering that same neighbor also tried to sell you a lucky potato. But still, the winter night has a way of making even the most skeptical mind wander. You rise to stir the embers one last time, watching them glow gold, red, and deep orange. The fire snaps softly, the kind of sound that makes your bones feel warm, even if only for a moment. You let your gaze soften, absorbing the flicker, the shadows, the hush. Outside, the world is buried in darkness, the sky a velvet void stretching endlessly. Inside, there's light, there's warmth, there's the cocoon of a tiny fire holding winter at bay. And while the night may be long, too long, perhaps you settle into it, letting the slow rhythm of darkness lull your thoughts into something quiet, steady, and strangely peaceful. The fire settles into a lazy glow, and you let the quiet stretch for a moment longer before your stomach gives a pointed reminder that winter doesn't pause just because the sun vanished at 4 in the afternoon. You sigh, shift your cloak aside, and reach for the small wooden bowl that has become your loyal, if uninspiring, dining companion these past few months. This is the season when food turns from something you enjoy into something you negotiate with. Every meal is a careful balancing act between what you want, what you have, and what you absolutely must save for later. You lift the lid from the pot by the hearth, releasing a puff of steam that smells like, well, mostly root vegetables. Again, you ladle out a scoop, watching the familiar chunks swirl around turnips, carrots, maybe a potato, if the universe is feeling generous today. You give it a stir, trying to convince yourself that this evening's stew is somehow different from the one you ate yesterday or last week, or, in that other life, when you had dreams beyond, please let the pickles last until spring. A mainstream historical fact whispers through your mind. Rationing wasn't just smart in winter, it was essential. Most medieval households aimed to make their autumn stores stretch until early spring, a tall order when winter sometimes dragged on like a long-winded bard who doesn't know when to end a story. Bread grew harder, meat grew scarcer, ale got weaker. By late winter, many families were eating what modern people would politely call creative combinations. You call them culinary dares. You take your first bite. It's warm, filling, and tastes exactly like what it is. Fuel. You're grateful for it, even if part of you fantasizes about summer apples with the intensity of someone in the middle of a dramatic romance. You lean back, bowl in hand, and let the warmth spread through your chest. Food doesn't just feed your body, it marks the rhythm of the season. Early, winter meals are still hearty. Midwinter meals are careful. Late winter meals are strategic. And tonight, as you chew slowly, you feel yourself inching toward the careful stretch. You're not starving. You're not desperate. But you're aware. Aware of each bite, each crumb, each flicker of the dwindling supplies tucked safely or anxiously into the cellar. You set the bowl down and reach for the small loaf of bread wrapped in cloth. It's firm. Actually, firm might be generous. This bread could double as a defensive weapon. You slice off a piece using a level of pressure that suggests you're negotiating peace between two stubborn kingdoms. You soak the chunk in your stew to soften it, muttering under your breath about how bread this hard should probably be considered a crime. A quirky tidbit surfaces. Some medieval folks softened stale bread by floating it over steaming pots or tucking it under their armpits for a few minutes. You look at your loaf, consider your options, and decide, no, you have at least some dignity left. Probably. You tear off a bite and savor it in the most reluctant way imaginable. It's edible. It's warm. It's doing its job. And yet, you can't help laughing at the thought of future people complaining about not having enough seasoning. You'd love seasoning. You dream of seasoning. You would write poems about seasoning. As you eat, you hear faint noises from outside, someone chopping wood, the muffled thud of snow sliding from a roof, a dog barking at something only dogs and mysterious winter spirits can see. The longer nights make these sounds feel strange and echoing, like the village is shrinking into itself, every household tucked behind its doors, doing the same thing you are, eating carefully, thinking carefully, hoping carefully. Historians still argue whether medieval rations were as dire as folklore claims or if people had more food security than we imagine. But here, in your wool-wrapped reality, you know this much. Nothing is wasted. A single carrot is precious. A strip of smoked meat is a treasure. A pot of stew is not a meal, it's a strategy. You finish your bowl and scrape the inside carefully, unwilling to leave even a hint of warmth behind. Then you pour yourself a cup of weak ale, the kind that tastes faintly like someone left water near real ale and hoped it would absorb the flavor through osmosis. You take a sip, wrinkle your nose, and drink it anyway. It's at moments like this that you understand why winter feasts feel so extravagant. Not because they're luxurious, most aren't, but because they represent a joyful break from the routine of rationing. A small celebration of, we made it this far. But those days are rare, and tonight is not one of them. You tidy your dishes, wiping the bowl with the last bite of bread before tucking it away. You make a mental note of everything you used today, how much grain, how many roots, how much wood, and calculate to your head what tomorrow will require. It's a constant balancing act, one that feels both exhausting and strangely grounding. Finally, you sit back down by the hearth and let the warm flicker brush your face. Hunger is quiet now, not fully satisfied, but soothed enough to hold still. You lean your head against the wall, feeling the weight of the season press in from all sides, but also the comfort of knowing you've done what you can. You've stretched the food. You've saved what matters. You've made another small step through the long, demanding winter. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the wind scratch at the shutters, and promise yourself that tomorrow, somehow, you'll make the rations stretch again. You wake the next morning with the lingering taste of last night's thin stew still clinging to your memory. But winter doesn't care about your culinary disappointment. It cares about work, endless, repetitive, community-bound work. The kind of work that no single person can shoulder alone. Not unless they want their roof caving in or their firewood vanishing into an alternate dimension known as we didn't gather enough because we were lazy. So today, instead of staying tucked inside your smoky cocoon, you bundle up again and step outside into the village grind. The snow has settled into a thick, crunchy blanket that squeaks under your boots. Not a polite squeak either, more like a shrill, "Oh, you're awake," from the ground itself. You sigh and trudge toward the center of the village, where a small group of your neighbors is already gathering like a flock of disgruntled, wool-wrapped birds. Everyone's breath hangs in the air like tiny personal clouds. Everyone looks cold. Everyone looks tired. And yet, you all nod to each other in that unspoken winter greeting. We are suffering, but we are suffering together. A mainstream historical fact floats into your mind. Village labor in winter was often communal. Roof repairs, firewood hauling, clearing paths, maintaining barns, these were tasks shared among households, not just for efficiency, but because cooperation reduced the risk of anyone being left vulnerable. If the blacksmith's roof collapses, that's everyone's problem. If the old widow down the lane runs out of wood, that's everyone's problem. If Thomas the Cooper accidentally sets something on fire again, that is definitely everyone's problem. Today's task is roof checking, a tedious but necessary chore. The snow piles heavily on thatch, and too much weight can turn a perfectly good house into a perfectly miserable catastrophe. So you and half the village gather ladders and long poles and begin poking at roofs with the collective caution of people who do not wish to be buried alive in icy hay. You jab upward, watching clumps of snow tumble down like miniature avalanches. The wind lifts some into swirling powder, dusting your face in cold glitter. Behind you, someone slips. Someone curses mildly, still PG-13. Someone else laughs. And for a brief moment, the village grind feels less like punishment and more like a group exercise class where everyone skipped the warm-up. While working, you hear someone recap the latest gossip, the medieval version of morning coffee chatter. Apparently, the innkeeper claims he saw a wolf at dusk last night, though he also claims he can smell lies from a mile away, so you take that with the same skepticism you reserve for his watered-down ale. But gossip is currency, and you listen anyway, because it keeps your mind busy while your hands go numb. You move to the next house, pole in hand, and tap along the thatch, clearing more snow. As you do, a quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some old folktales claim that knocking snow off roofs could disturb winter spirits napping in the drifts, so people were encouraged to whisper apologies to avoid supernatural retaliation. You whisper a half-hearted sorry just in case, because winter already throws enough tantrums on its own. Once the roofs are cleared, the group shifts to the next task, hauling firewood. You form a line from the forest edge to the village square, passing logs from hand to hand like a slow-motion relay race. It's grueling, repetitive work. Your arms ache, your gloves stiffen with frost, and the logs leave little smears of bark on your clothes. But the rhythm of it, the passing, the crunching snow, the occasional joke someone tosses down the line, creates a sense of unity that warms you more than you expect. Historians still argue whether medieval communities were as tightly knit as stories suggest, or if cooperation was more transactional. You think about it as you pass another log. Is the village helping because they care, or because they know one weak link drags the whole chain? The truth is probably a bit of both. People care because they have to. They care because not caring is expensive. They care because winter gives no discounts. After the firewood line dissolves, the group disperses into smaller pairs and trios to tackle whatever lingering chores remain. You join two neighbors in repairing the north fence, which winter seems determined to destroy every year. The wood is brittle, the nails are cold, and the ground is frozen so solid that hammering a post into it feels like trying to persuade a mountain to move. Still, you work. You laugh a little. You swear mildly when your hammer slips. Your companions do the same. Winter work is too hard to do silently. As you head toward your house for a short break, you notice the communal well area has iced over again. Of course it has. Because winter. You stop with two others to break the thick crystalline crust, chipping away until water sloshes up in slushy waves. Everyone takes turns hauling buckets back home, careful not to spill because water is heavy, and today your arms feel like they're made of carefully aged cheese. You take a moment to breathe. The air burns, your lungs a little, but you relish the pause. The village hums around you, bundled figures shuffling between houses, distant laughter or complaint, smoke rising from chimneys like soft signals of survival. The grind is heavy, but it's shared. That's what makes it bearable. Finally, you return to your home, arms full of wood, boots stamping snow by the door. You set everything down and sink onto your bench with a groan that feels older than time itself. Your body aches. Your face is wind-chapped. Your hair smells like smoke, frost, and something you can only describe as community perspiration. But you did it. The village did it. Winter may be relentless, but so are you, especially when you're not doing it alone. By the time the village chores wind down, the clouds have thickened into a heavy grey quilt overhead, one of those skies that looks like it's holding its breath before dropping something dramatic. You shake the snow off your cloak, step outside again to fetch a pail of water, and that's when it begins. A single flake drifts past your face, then another, then a dozen. Within moments, the world transforms into a slow-motion cascade of white. You tilt your head back, watching the snow spiral down like the sky has decided to empty an entire pillow over the earth. At first, it's peaceful, gentle, almost cozy. You stand still, letting the flakes land on your hood and cloak, watching them build in delicate clusters along the edges of your sleeves. Everything softens under snow, sounds, shapes, even your thoughts. The village looks blurred around the edges, every roof frosted, every fence wearing a powdery cap. It's a quiet that feels almost respectful, like winter trying to apologize for all the chores it made you do earlier. But then the snowfall thickens, and you remember why people call this travel-stopping snow. Visibility drops, paths disappear. The wind nudges the flakes sideways, swirling them into little ghost twisters that slither along the ground. And as beautiful as it is, you also know this much. Snow is not your friend. Snow is the frenemy who pretends to be pretty while hiding ankle-deep traps everywhere. Still, you have work to do. So you start walking, pushing into the drifting white fluff that's slowly erasing the familiar world. This kind of snow swallows sound. Your footsteps are muffled, almost swallowed. Your breath clouds instantly, making your scarf damp. Your boots sink into the powder, each step leaving a deep, crisp imprint that looks like it belongs to someone who regrets their life choices. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your mind. Heavy snowfall could isolate medieval villages for days, sometimes weeks. Roads became impassable. Traders got stuck. Messengers turned back. Isolation wasn't a dramatic event, it was simply winter asserting its control. And as you trudge along, legs working twice as hard to move half as far, you understand why winter travel was considered both difficult and dangerous. Your destination isn't far: the barn, the chickens, maybe a neighbor who needs help, but the snow makes it feel like you're crossing an entire continent. You lift your knees high with each step to avoid catching your foot under hidden drifts. Sometimes you misjudge and plunge deeper than expected. The snow hugs your leg like an overly friendly cat, and you grunt, wobble, and regain balance with all the grace of a startled goat. A quirky tidbit dances into your memory. Some medieval people believed that freshly fallen snow absorbed noise and stole voices, creating silence because winter spirits were listening. You listen now, really listen, and hear almost nothing except your own breathing. It's eerie. It's beautiful. It's the kind of quiet that makes your brain whisper, "You're the last person on Earth." Even though you can still see Thomas's crooked chimney puffing smugly in the distance, you stop for a moment and simply take it in. The snow settles on your hood, forming a chill crown. The fields are a blank page, smooth and untouched. The trees lining the path are bowed under white weight, branches drooping like they're exhausted from holding up the sky. From somewhere far off, you hear the faint clank of a cowbell, the only sound interrupting the snowfall's hush. Historians still argue whether people in medieval Europe saw snow as magical or merely inconvenient. You suspect it was both. It transforms everything, creates a beauty so crisp it almost hurts to look at, and yet it complicates every single task you have. Walking, hauling, feeding animals, even finding your own doorstep, the snow makes you earn every movement. When you reach the barn, you brush off the door and push it open, sending a flurry of white drifting to the floor. Inside, the air is warmer, fragrant with hay and damp wood. The animals look at you with a mixture of confusion and relief, as if to say, "Finally, the warm-blooded one has returned." You stomp your boots to free the snow, shake out your cloak, and begin checking the water buckets, which of course have frozen solid again because winter has no respect for your patience. As you chip ice with a small mallet, snow continues to fall outside, soft and relentless. When you finish, you lean on the stall wall for a moment, catching your breath. Your hands are numb, your nose drips embarrassingly, and you can feel snow melting inside your hood. But strangely, you're calm. Snowfall has a way of smoothing your thoughts, like the world is wrapped in a cold, white blanket that mutes everything except the here and now. When you step back outside, the snowfall has grown thicker still. The entire village is a blur, smoky chimneys, dark shapes of houses, the faint glow of candles behind shutters. Pathways have disappeared entirely, replaced by guesswork and muscle memory. You walk home slower this time, partly because you don't want to faceplant, but partly because the scene is mesmerizing. Snowflakes land on your eyelashes, melting into tiny cold pinpricks. Your cloak collects a small ridge of white along the shoulders. Your boots vanish into the drifts with each step, sending little poofs of powder flying. And even though the snow complicates everything, even though it makes winter feel longer, harder, heavier, you can't deny the strange piece of it, the quiet, the beauty, the feeling that the world has paused for a moment, holding still just for you. You reach your door at last, stomp the snow from your boots, and shake your cloak like a dog emerging from a lake. A pile of white forms instantly on the floor. You brush it aside with your foot, sigh contentedly, and step inside, letting the warmth fold around you. Outside, the snow keeps falling, covering your footprints. Winter erases, winter softens, winter hushes snowfall, turning the world into a blank page you'll have to walk across again tomorrow. You've barely warmed your hands by the hearth before a familiar unease pricks at the back of your mind, a tiny reminder that winter isn't just cold air and inconvenient snowdrifts. It has another trick, sneakier and far more personal: sickness. The kind that slinks through the village when the nights stretch long, the windows stay shut, and everyone is huddled together, breathing the same smoky, stale air. You sip a mug of warm herbal tea, hoping it wards off whatever might be lurking, but you know winter doesn't play favorites. It just waits. By morning, the first sign arrives. A cough, echoing across the yard, carried on the wind like a warning bell. You pause, hand on the doorframe, listening. It's a deep, chesty cough, the kind that rattles, the kind that makes you immediately consider reboiling your water, your tea, and possibly your soul. You tighten your scarf, push open the door, and head toward Tomas's house, because of course it's Tomas. Winter always picks the loudest villager first. Your boots crunch over the frozen ground, each step stiff and slightly uneven from yesterday's snowfall. You knock, step back, and the door cracks open to reveal Tomas looking well terrible, cheeks flushed, nose red, blanket around his shoulders like he's auditioning for the role of miserable medieval burrito. He tries to greet you, but it comes out as another cough that makes the rafters shake. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Medieval winters were notorious for illness. Not necessarily catastrophic plagues, though those happened too, but the steady grind of respiratory infections, fevers, chills, stomach troubles, and the occasional mystery ailment that everyone blamed on bad humors or air that feels wrong. With the cold sealing people indoors and warmth being more aspirational than actual, sickness spread fast. You step inside cautiously, mostly because Tomas waves you in, but also because leaving him alone like this would, I feel like tempting fate. The small room is thick with warm, damp air, the unmistakable scent of fever sweat and boiled herbs. A pot steams over the hearth, filled with something green, bitter, and suspicious. Tomas claims the herbalist made it for him. You're not convinced it isn't swamp water. You help him ease onto the bench by the fire, tucking the blanket around him more securely. He mumbles something in gratitude, then immediately tries to stand up again to check on the chickens, which you absolutely do not allow. You give him a stern look, which is difficult because your face is half hidden by your scarf, but the message gets across. He slumps back down. A quirky tidbit you once read on a scrap of parchment comes to mind. Some medieval people believed warming a brick by the fire and placing it at the foot of the sick bed could draw illness downward and out. You're skeptical, but you heat a brick anyway because it won't hurt and because Tomas insists it worked. For his uncle 15 winters ago. His uncle is very much alive, so maybe there's something to it. Or maybe his uncle was just lucky. You pour him a ladle of the herbal concoction, holding your breath as you lift it. It smells like boiled hope and regret. Still, you offer it to him, and he sips it with a wince. Herbs, he croaks. Good for the lungs. You nod encouragingly. You do not comment on the fact that it tastes like someone tried to stew a meadow. Winter sickness isn't just physical, it affects the rhythm of the village. You see it as you leave Tomas's house. Windows are shuttered tight. Smoke curls from chimneys where families hover around their hearths, tending the sick or avoiding becoming the sick. A woman hurries toward the herbalist's hut. A child sniffles as he shuffles past. You feel every cough as if it were a gust of cold wind aimed directly at your immune system. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers understood contagion in any meaningful way. Some say they believed illness came from bad air. Others say they blamed supernatural forces. While some evidence hints at practical knowledge keeping sick people warm, feeding them broths, letting them rest. You take comfort in the fact that even without modern science, people weren't clueless. They watched, they learned, they adapted. And today, you're adapting too. By washing your hands in cold water until your fingers hurt, and then drying them so aggressively the rough cloth might as well be sandpaper. The day drags on with the quiet tension of sickness hanging in the air. You help where you can, fetching water for someone too weak to walk, carrying firewood for the widow who keeps coughing into her sleeve, checking on the children who suddenly look too pale. You're careful, but not distant. Winter demands caution, not isolation. As evening approaches, you return home exhausted, your body heavy with cold and concern. You light the hearth, let the warmth wrap its fingers around your chilled bones, and try not to think about the tickle in your throat. It's nothing. Definitely nothing. Probably. You prepare a small pot of broth just in case. The aroma fills the room with something soothing, something reassuring. You take a sip. Warm, comforting, mildly bland. Perfect winter food. Hours pass, and outside the wind picks up, rushing against your shutters like an impatient visitor. You tighten your cloak around your shoulders and poke the fire again, watching the embers flare. The snow outside glows faintly, softening the world. But you know that beneath that softness, winter sickness still prowls, quiet but persistent. You settle onto your bench with your blanket around your shoulders, listening to the crackle of the fire and your own breathing, deliberate and steady. Winter may bring illness, fear, and long nights filled with coughing neighbors, but it also brings resilience, care, the subtle strength of surviving together. You sip another mouthful of broth and let the warmth settle deep. Tomorrow, you remind yourself, you'll check on Tomas again. And maybe, just maybe, you won't catch what he has. Night settles in with a cold that feels almost ceremonial, as if winter itself is holding some kind of frosty vigil outside your door. You sit by the hearth, blanket around your shoulders, sipping the last of your lukewarm broth when your thoughts drift inevitably to the one thing every medieval winter leans on just as heavily as firewood and food stores: faith. Not just religious faith, though that runs deep, but a whole constellation of beliefs, rituals, superstitions, and whispered hopes that help you survive the long, dark stretch between the first frost and the first thaw. You set your bowl aside and stand, stretching your stiff back. The candle on the table flickers with the draft that always sneaks under the door. You watch the flame dance, small but stubborn, and you can't help feeling how symbolic it is, just one trembling light pushing back the dark. Winter has a way of making tiny flames feel heroic. You pull on your cloak and step outside for a moment, partly to check the weather, partly because you need a breath of fresh air that doesn't taste like smoke, boiled vegetables, and your own anxiety. The world outside is still, the snow glowing faintly under a sliver of moon. The cold nips your cheeks instantly. You exhale, watching your breath rise like a tiny ghost. The silence feels thick, almost sacred. And in that stillness, you remember the old rituals everyone here carries, some openly, some secretly. A mainstream historical fact echoes in your memory. Winter was a deeply spiritual season for medieval Europeans. With darkness dominating the days and hardship pressing close, people leaned heavily on ritual Christian rites layered over much older seasonal traditions. Blessing the livestock, lighting midwinter candles, observing feast days that promised renewal. You feel those layers in the air now, ancient and new woven together like wool and thread. You walk toward the small wooden cross that stands near the center of the village, a simple thing, decorated with dried herbs and a faded ribbon. Someone has left a small wreath of evergreen at the base, its scent sharp and hopeful. Evergreens, after all, symbolize endurance, the promise that not everything dies in the cold. A quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some medieval villagers believed burning sprigs of evergreen in the hearth during midwinter kept away wandering spirits drawn to the long nights. Others believed carrying a bit of holly in your pocket would keep you healthy. You reach down, pick a tiny pine needle from the wreath, and tuck it under the edge of your cloak, just in case. Winter doesn't judge precaution. You glance around. A few homes still glow with candlelight through their shutters, small golden dots scattered across the darkness. You imagine families inside saying quiet prayers, reciting familiar words that anchor them through the gloom. For some, faith is a comfort. For others, it's a habit. For most, it's simply part of survival. Another layer of insulation against a world that doesn't always feel merciful. You step toward your neighbor's house, the elderly widow with the cough that you've been quietly worrying about. You tap lightly. She answers with a soft grunt, and you see she's already set a little bundle of dried sage near her hearth. Muttering that sage smoke keeps illness from settling too deep. You help her adjust her blankets, stoke her fire, and whisper a gentle blessing, not because you're deeply religious, but because blessings feel like warm hands on a cold night. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers were genuinely devout or whether faith was simply woven into daily life so tightly that people followed ritual because it was expected. You think about that as you step outside again. Maybe the question doesn't matter. When winter tightens its grip, everyone reaches for whatever helps them endure. Back home, you sit by the hearth and open the tiny wooden box where you keep your own tokens. Nothing fancy, just a smooth stone from summer, a bit of ribbon from last year's festival, and a small carved charm shaped like a star. A friend gave it to you ages ago, saying it brought luck in dark seasons. You're not entirely convinced it works, but tonight you hold it anyway, feeling the familiar grooves beneath your fingers. You set the charm on the table beside your candle. The flame reflects in its polished edges, making it look alive for a moment. You sit back, pull your blanket around your shoulders, and let yourself breathe deeply, slowly, quietly. Outside, the wind shifts a long, low sigh, working its way through the empty streets. The snow creaks, the night settles heavier, and you feel something inside you settle too, like the winter has wrapped itself around you but not crushed you. Faith, whatever shape it takes, isn't about guarantees. It's about endurance. It's about meaning. It's about reminding yourself that even though the nights are long, the light does return. You take one last look at the charm, then at the flickering candle flame, then at the red glow of the hearth. 3 lights, small but steady, and slowly, with that soft reassurance warming your chest more than the fire does, you let your eyes drift closed for just a moment, feeling for the first time in days quietly, gently hopeful. Morning creeps in slowly, as if winter itself is reluctant to get out of bed. But animals don't share that luxury. They wake because they must, and so do you. You groan a little as you pull yourself from beneath your blanket, your joints crackling like someone stepped on a basket of twigs, and you take a moment to mentally prepare for what is, without fail, the coldest part of your entire winter routine, keeping your livestock alive. You tug your layers back on wool, more wool, and a dash of wool for variety and step outside. The air immediately lunges at your face like a playful but overly aggressive cat. You crunch through the snow toward the barn, boots sinking deep into drifts that seem to get higher every day. The sun hasn't fully risen, and the sky looks like diluted ink, pale and washed across the horizon. You reach the barn door and push it open with your shoulder. The hinges groan as if they, too, are tired of winter. Inside, your animals lift their heads in unison. The cow, the goats, the donkey, the sheep, and the chickens all wearing the same expression. Finally, the tall creature with the food has returned. A mainstream historical fact slips into your thoughts. Livestock were the backbone of medieval survival. A cow wasn't just a cow, it was dairy, labor, manure for fields, future calves, and the village's unofficial mood support. Goats were hardy creatures that produced milk even, in tough seasons. Chickens provided eggs, warmth, and occasional comedic relief. Losing any animal wasn't just sad, it was devastating. You start with the water, which is always the worst challenge. The buckets are frozen completely, solid white discs of ice glaring up at you like judgmental eyeballs. You kneel, pick up your mallet, and begin whacking the surface with controlled annoyance. The ice cracks, splinters, and finally breaks apart enough for you to scoop pieces out. You refill the bucket with slushy water and slide it toward the cow, who immediately sniffs it with an unimpressed snort before taking a drink. The goats bleat impatiently, stamping their little hooves like furry divas. You toss them hay and scratch one of them behind the ears, a gesture she pretends not to enjoy even though she absolutely leans into it. Chickens flutter around your boots, pecking at stray seeds and giving you that beady-eyed stare that makes you vaguely uneasy. You swear chickens know too. Much. A quirky tidbit floats through your mind. Some medieval farmers believed that speaking kindly to cows in winter encouraged them to give more milk, while insulting goats supposedly helped them toughen up against the cold. You look at your goats, who already act like tiny, chaotic nobility, and decide absolutely no part of you is brave enough to insult them. Next, you move toward the donkey, who looks at you with an expression that is half affection, half existential dread. You pat his neck and brush ice crystals from his fur. His breath fogs the air in warm bursts, and for a moment you press your hands near his muzzle just to warm your fingers. He pretends not to notice, because he is polite. Historians still argue whether medieval barns were genuinely warmer than outdoor temperatures, or if that's just a romantic assumption people make because they picture barns full of cozy animals. You can confirm, warmer is a very generous term. At best, the barn blocks the wind. At worst, the air hovers barely above freezing, scented strongly with hay, damp wood, and the collective thoughts of creatures who are also tired of winter. You muck out the stalls next, your least favorite chore, but also the most necessary. If bedding gets too damp or frozen, animals can fall ill. You shovel, lift, toss, and mutter several PG-13 words under your breath as your hands go numb again. By the time you finish, your cloak smells like a combination of sweat, straw, and questionable choices. Winter is glamorous like that. You take a short break, leaning against a beam while your breath fogs the air in soft white puffs. The animals settle back into chewing, bleating, clucking, and quietly existing their winter symphony, a strange comfort. You're tired, cold, and sore, but the barn feels alive, and that makes the effort worth it. Before heading out, you double-check the rafters and seal small cracks where wind sneaks through. Last year, a draft turned the barn into something resembling a giant refrigerator, and you refuse to let history repeat itself. You tie a few loose planks, adjust some thatch, and stomp your feet to encourage circulation in your toes, which have developed the emotional texture of slightly disappointed icicles. You open the barn door again, stepping back into the crisp morning. Snowflakes drift softly, lazily, as if the sky is casually adding sprinkles to the world. You hug your cloak closer, feeling the cold bite at your cheeks once more. Keeping animals alive in winter isn't heroic. It's not glamorous. It's not even particularly poetic. It's just necessary. A gentle, persistent rhythm that keeps life pulsing through the coldest months. You trudge back toward your house, feeling equal parts exhausted and strangely proud. Your animals live because you do this, because you show up every morning with frozen fingers and stubborn determination. Because winter may be harsh, but you're harder to kill than you look. You take one last glance at the barn, see a faint puff of warm breath from the cow drifting into the cold air, and let a small smile tug at your lips. You did good. And tomorrow, you'll do it again. You step back inside your house after tending the animals, stamping lingering snow from your boots, and rubbing your hands until the feeling returns slowly, grudgingly, like your fingers are considering whether they're done being offended. The warmth from the hearth greets you with a gentle sigh, and for a moment you stand there, cloaked in steam from your thawing clothes, feeling the contrast between the biting cold outside and the snug, smoky interior. Winter might make the world harsh, but inside these walls you carve out pockets of refuge, small, domestic havens built one ember, one chore, one stubborn insistence on survival at a time. Today's refuge comes in the form of winter crafts, indoor work, that doesn't demand brute strength or frozen fingers, but instead asks for patience, rhythm, and a willingness to sit still while the world outside blusters and snows itself into a mood. You settle near the fire, pulling a basket of wool toward you. It's soft, slightly oily, and smells faintly of sheep, your sheep, specifically, who you thank silently for shedding something other than attitude for once. A mainstream historical fact flits into your thoughts. Winter was prime crafting season. With fields dormant and outdoor labor limited by daylight and temperature, medieval households focused on spinning, weaving, sewing, carving, mending, and producing the countless small items essential for daily life. Winter wasn't restful. It was productive in quieter ways. Every garment you wear, every blanket you sleep under, every tool you rely on pass through this season of repetitive handiwork. You pick up your spindle and begin the familiar dance. Twist, pull, draft, release. The wool thins into a delicate stream of fiber, winding itself into thread under your guidance. Your hands move automatically, almost instinctively, their muscle memory far better trained than your winter-stiff fingers care to admit. You watch the spindle whirl, hypnotic in its simple, steady motion. There's something soothing about this work, monotonous, yes, but in the best possible way, like the medieval equivalent of those calming, endless loop videos people in the future might stare at for stress relief. As the fire crackles, a quirky tidbit comes to mind. Some people believed that spinning on certain nights, especially the long, dark ones around midwinter, could draw good fortune into the household, as though the thread itself wove luck into its fibers. Others warned against spinning too late at night, claiming mischievous spirits might tangle the wool or twist the thread the wrong way while you weren't looking. You glance at your neatly forming yarn and whisper, "Behave," just in case anything supernatural is paying attention. When your back starts to ache from leaning forward, you set the spindle aside and switch tasks, because winter crafts are nothing if not a rotating parade of things that must be fixed before spring. Today's list includes patching a hole in your cloak, where some overly excited goat nibbled last autumn, tightening the loose cord on your mittens, and repairing a wobbly stool that has been threatening to betray you for weeks. You pull the cloak into your lap, thread a bone needle, and start stitching. The fabric is thick and stubborn, the needle slightly dull, your fingers clumsy from the cold. Each stitch requires more force than seems reasonable, and every time the thread snags you mutter words you're pretty sure the village priest would not approve of. But slowly, steadily, the hole closes, the cloak strengthens. The winter armor repairs itself. Historians still argue whether medieval people found joy in these small, repetitive winter crafts, or if they simply endured them. You suspect both are true. On some days, the rhythm feels comforting. On others, the tedium feels endless. Today, with the wind sighing outside and the fire warm at your side, you find yourself on the comforting side of the spectrum. You set the cloak aside and pick up the stool next. One of its legs is loose, a simple fix, requiring only a wooden peg and some careful hammering. You hold the peg in place, give it a few firm taps, and listen to the satisfying sound of wood meeting wood. You test the stool. It wobbles only slightly now, acceptable by winter standards. No one expects perfection in the season of frozen everything. You stretch your arms, feeling the knots unwinding slowly. The firelight paints soft amber shapes across the room, flickering over wool, wood, tools, and the slow accumulation of little repairs. This is winter's quiet heartbeat, small tasks done by hand, things made or fixed by your own effort. There's pride in it, even if the work is humble. Eventually you return to spinning, mostly because it's the kind of task that pairs well with daydreaming. Your thoughts drift to the coming days, the chores waiting outside, the slow dwindling of supplies, the next snowstorm you can smell even now. But as your hands continue the gentle twist and pull rhythm, you feel your mind settle. Winter may demand much of you, but it also gives you these pockets of stillness, moments to create, to mend, to simply exist in the glow of the hearth while your breath fogs faintly in the cold corners of the room. You finish another length of thread, wrap it carefully, and place it in the basket. When spring returns, this will become cloth, clothing, patchwork, maybe even something beautiful, if you're lucky and the goats stay out of trouble. You lean back, watching the fire, feeling the warmth seep into your bones. The crafts are done for now. Your shoulders ache, your fingers are tired, but your spirit feels a little steadier. Outside, the snow continues its slow, silent drift. Inside, you've spun a tiny thread of order into the chaos of winter. You stretch your hands over the fire again, letting the warmth sink into your knuckles, when a realization settles in. For all the chores, all the cold, all the endless scraping of frost from buckets and boots, winter's hardest challenge isn't outside at all. It's in here, in the tight walls of your home, in the way cold months shrink your world until everyone you live with feels closer, sometimes comfortingly close. Sometimes, if you breathe loudly one more time, I'm moving into the barn, close. You shift on the bench, feeling the familiar pinch of a sore back, and glance around the room, the single room that holds your life all winter long. Your cloak hangs by the door. Your repaired stool stands proudly by the wall. The spindle sits beside your basket of wool. And in the middle of it all, your bed, your fire, your everything, pressed together like the world is insisting on intimacy. And it's not just you. Every household in the village is packed the same way: families, animals, tools, food stores, hopes, and irritations all compressed into a tiny living space because the season allows no alternative. A mainstream historical fact emerges. Most medieval homes, especially those of common folk, were single-room structures during this period. Cooking, sleeping, working, all of it happened in the same tight space. Privacy wasn't a thing, it was a rumor. You stretch again, partly because your shoulders ache and partly because stretching is a good distraction from the feeling that your house is shrinking by the hour. The fire snaps, casting warm orange light across the walls. You hear soft movement from outside, a goat bleating in the barn, a neighbor's door thudding shut, the distant crack of ice shifting somewhere in the dark. Winter may quiet the world, but it doesn't mute it completely. You settle back onto the bench and let your thoughts wander to the strange cocktail of loneliness and closeness that defines the season. On some days, the solitude feels peaceful. You relish the slow mornings, the quiet crafts, the small rituals that ground you. But on other days, the stillness presses against your ribs, making the hours stretch long and thin. You glance toward the door again, half expecting someone to knock just to break the silence. A quirky tidbit floats to mind. You once heard that some villagers believed winter loneliness could invite wandering spirits into the home, not the malicious kind, but the kind that liked to sit by the hearth as silent visitors, feeding on the quiet. Some families left a little bread on the table during long nights, just in case. Not for the spirits, of course. For comfort, for company, for the idea of presence. You look at your own table and consider placing a crust there yourself. But you're rationing, and spirits can get their own bread. Still, the superstition makes you smile. You inhale slowly. The air inside is warm, but it carries a stale edge, the price of keeping the shutters closed against the frost. Your breath mingles with the faint smells of wood smoke, wool, stew from earlier, and the few herbs hanging near the rafters. It's homey, familiar, a winter scent that comforts you more than it irritates you, at least most days. Your thoughts shift to the people you share the season with: neighbors, friends, the sometimes helpful, sometimes chaotic personalities that make village life communal and intense. There's Tomas, recovering slowly from his cough, the widow with her sage bundles, the children who keep making little snow beasts outside your door, some of which look suspiciously like goats. And then there are the families packed together inside their homes: parents, grandparents, cousins, siblings, everyone learning how to coexist in tight quarters for months at a time. Historians still argue whether winter strengthened medieval family bonds or strained them to their limits. On one hand, long nights meant storytelling, shared meals, quiet unity. On the other, they meant stepping over each other, sharing beds, listening to every cough, sneeze, and sleep sound in a communal arrangement that left no room for secrets or solitude. You suspect the truth is both. Winter brings people together and reminds them why alone time is sacred. You pick up a small carving knife, a simple tool, the handle worn smooth in a piece of scrap wood. You're not a master carver, not even close, but sometimes your hands need something to do while your mind drifts. The wood curls away in small spirals with each careful stroke, and the repetitive motion grounds you. The fire snaps again, and the sound fills the space like a heartbeat. As you carve, your mind drifts to the times. Winter closeness feels comforting the nights when neighbors gather for small, quiet conversations, telling stories you've all heard before, but pretending you haven't. The evenings when someone knocks on your door with a steaming mug of something warm, claiming they made too much, even though you both know they just needed company. Those are the moments that make the season feel less like a test and more like a shared experience. Your carving takes shape slowly, a bird, maybe, or something pretending to be one. You turn it in your hands, examining your handiwork. Not perfect, but not terrible. A small creation born from long winter hours. The wind sighs outside, brushing snow against your shutters. You pause, listening. That sound, soft, persistent, is winter's quiet conversation with your home. You wrap your cloak tighter around your shoulders, feeling its weight settle against you like a familiar friend. You place the carving on the mantel, beside your spindle and the small charm from earlier, and stand. Your joints ache pleasantly. Your mind feels steady again. Loneliness and closeness in winter aren't opposites, you realize they're companions. They weave through your days, reminding you that although the world outside sleeps, life inside continues quietly, stubbornly, beautifully. You sit again by the fire, let your eyes soften, and breathe in the stillness that winter brings. You're alone, but not lonely. You're enclosed, but not trapped. You're surrounded by quiet, but you're also surrounded by memories, tasks, creations, and the hum of life happening just beyond your door. Tomorrow, the village will stir again. Tomorrow, the closeness will return with all its warmth and all its challenges. Tonight, you rest in the soft middle ground between solitude and connection, exactly where winter sometimes feels most bearable. The fire has burned low by the time you push yourself up from the bench, stretching the stiffness from your shoulders. Outside, the wind has shifted again. Your ears can feel it even before the sound reaches you. It's sharper now, threading through cracks and corners like a curious stray. You tighten your cloak and step toward the door, instinctively bracing. If winter has a personality, this is the part of the season when it starts getting dramatic. You unlatch the door and step outside. The night greets you with a brittle cold that clings to your face instantly. The air feels thinner somehow, more alert, like it's waiting for something. And as you stand there, boots planted in the snow, you remember the unspoken truth of deep winter. The cold isn't the only thing you have to survive. There are dangers tucked into this season, quiet, creeping, and sometimes outright theatrical ones. You take a few steps toward the far edge of your yard, snow crunching loud beneath your feet, and glance toward the tree line. Beyond it lies the forest, dark and sprawling, where winter likes to hide its sharpest teeth. A mainstream historical fact floats through your thoughts. Avalanches, while more common in mountain regions, were a real threat for medieval travelers and shepherds moving through snowy passes. Heavy snow sitting atop old layers could slide without warning, taking livestock, travelers, and entire outbuildings with it. Even here, in gentler hills, people still told stories of sudden white crashes that swallowed paths or buried fences. And every winter, someone would stand at the tavern door and swear they heard deep rumbling in the distance, the kind that made the ground tremble. You step a little closer to the tree line, listening. No rumbling tonight. Just the creak of snow settling on branches, the soft hiss of wind gliding across drifts, and the faint snap of something stepping on twigs. You freeze. Not metaphorically. You freeze like someone who has just remembered that winter doesn't just test your endurance, it tests your attention. A shape moves between the trees. Just a flicker. A shadow shifting. You squint, holding your breath. Your mind helpfully supplies every predator-related memory you've ever heard. Wolves, for example, are a familiar part of winter folklore, not just because they roam closer to villages in lean months, but because they become symbols of winter's hunger. And while wolves rarely targeted humans, hunger makes creatures bold. The shape shifts again, then emerges into the moonlight, and you nearly laugh with relief. It's the neighbor's goat, the troublemaking one, the one that chews on your cloak and pretends innocence like a professional actor. She bleats at you as if you're the intruder, then trots off, tail flicking proudly. You mutter something PG-13 under your breath and continue your perimeter check. Still, the incident reminds you how easy it is to let fear slink in with the cold, especially when the nights stretch long and the forest grows loud in strange ways. Some noises are normal branches snapping, owls calling, snow sliding off limbs. Others, well, historians still argue whether medieval people genuinely believed in winter spirits lurking beyond the hearth light, or whether these tales were poetic explanations for natural dangers. But when you're outside in the dark, hearing distant howls echo across frozen valleys, you understand why those stories took root. You continue walking, your breath puffing out in pale clouds. The moon sits low, washing the snow in a faint silver glow. Your boots creak with every step, and then, from somewhere beyond the far field, you hear it. A long, low howl, carried clean on the air. Now that is no goat. You pause, heart thudding softly. You've heard the village hunters talk about wolves, how they move silently, how their eyes catch moonlight, how they circle before they commit. But the howl tonight doesn't sound close. It sounds like a warning, or maybe a lament. You remind yourself that wolves rarely attack humans. You also remind yourself that rarely is doing a lot of heavy lifting right now. You take a slow breath and step back toward your house, not running, not panicking, just moving with purpose. The snow tugs at your boots with each step, making the journey feel longer than it is. Finally, your hand touches the doorframe, and you slip back inside with relief so palpable you could bottle it. The fire greets you with a warm crackling, as if it missed you during your brave yet deeply unnecessary outdoor adventure. You shut the door firmly, check the latch twice, then 3 times for good measure. You stand there a moment, letting the familiar heat chase away the cold that clung to your skin. As you settle back onto your bench, you can't help but acknowledge the larger truth. Winter danger isn't always teeth and claws. Sometimes it's ice slicking a path you walk every day. Sometimes it's a snowdrift hiding a hole. Sometimes it's the weight of snow on a roof, or a frozen stream that lies about how thick its surface really is. And sometimes it's simply the way fear whispers louder when the nights feel endless. A quirky tidbit surfaces, one that makes you chuckle. You once heard a traveling storyteller claim that people used to place small bells on their roofs so they'd hear the snow shifting before an avalanche. You have no idea if it's true, but you imagine medieval houses jingling in the wind like nervous festive decorations and can't help but snort a laugh. Your laughter fades into a soft exhale. You stare at the fire, letting the warmth pull the tension from your shoulders. Outside, the night continues, full of wolves, snow, wind, and whatever else lurks beyond the edge of the fields. But inside, you are safe. Tired, wary, perhaps a little jumpy but safe. You take one more slow breath, letting the crackling fire become the only sound in your world. Danger may always lurk in winter, but so does the stubborn, steady knowledge that you've survived it so far. And you plan on surviving it again tomorrow. Morning creeps in with a dull, grey glow that barely qualifies as daylight. You blink awake, feeling that deeply familiar winter stiffness like your joints spent the night auditioning for the role of creaking floorboard. You sit up, tug your cloak around your shoulders, and listen. The wind outside is restless again, scraping against the shutters with a kind of impatient hiss. And that's your cue, unfortunately, because today is one of those necessary but miserable days. You have to travel. Not far, not across kingdoms or mountain passes, but far enough that the winter roads will make you question your life choices. There's a small trading post a ways down the path, and you need a few essentials. More salt, if you can get it. Some spare nails. Maybe a coil of good, sturdy twine. And if the gods are kind, a handful of dried apples. The last time you had fruit, the leaves hadn't even turned. You pull on every layer of clothing you own, and then 2 more you find hanging nearby, because winter travel isn't fashion, it's fortification, and step outside. The cold hits you immediately, a sharp slap to the face that says, "Welcome back, try not to fall." The snow has crusted over into a thin, icy shell that crunches loudly underfoot. Each step feels like breaking glass. But you remind yourself this is preferable to soft, ankle-deep snow that swallows your boots whole. Barely preferable, but still. The path is almost unrecognizable. Snowdrifts have swallowed the familiar ridges and hollows, turning the world into rolling white dunes. The frozen stream beside the road glitters like glass, deceptively smooth and absolutely untrustworthy. A mainstream historical fact pops into your head. Winter travel in medieval Europe was notoriously dangerous. Roads weren't maintained the way they might be in warmer months, and many routes vanished completely under snow, forcing travelers to rely on memory, instinct, and the occasional helpful tree that refused to be buried. You tighten your scarf and begin the slow, careful trudge. Your boots slip on patches of ice. Your breath clouds in front of you in quick bursts. Each step is a negotiation between balance, courage, and gravity. Gravity, unfortunately, always eager to win. Several times, you slide just enough to panic, arms flailing in a way you hope no one sees. But somehow, miraculously, you stay upright. You move along the path, following the faint trace of earlier footprints. Some look human, some look like deer, and one set looks suspiciously like your neighbor's goat again, who apparently treats the entire countryside as her personal kingdom. As you walk, the wind picks up, tossing sharp flakes of snow sideways like tiny frozen daggers. They pepper your cloak and hood, stinging your cheeks. Your eyes water, your nose runs. You sniff loudly, because winter reduces everyone to their least glamorous selves. A quirky tidbit comes to mind, one you heard from a traveling merchant who claimed that in some regions, people strapped crude wooden snowshoes to their boots to walk more easily across drifts. You look down at your perfectly normal medieval shoes, which have the traction of a greased potato, and feel a pang of jealousy. Why didn't your village adopt that? Probably because someone tried it once and face-planted so hard, the idea was immediately banned. You continue. Step, crunch, slide, regret, repeat. About halfway there, the path dips near a frozen creek. You pause, testing the ground with your boot. It holds, but barely the ice groans under the weight of your hesitation alone. You steer well clear of it, reminding yourself of the horror stories shared around the hearth. Travelers who misjudged the thickness of ice, only to plunge waist-deep into freezing water. Hypothermia isn't a concept people name here, but everyone understands it instinctively. Historians still argue whether medieval travelers feared winter roads more for natural threats like wolves and ice, or human ones, like bandits taking advantage of isolation. You figure the answer is yes. Winter is generous like that. Finally, after what feels like 3 months and 8 personal crises, you see the outline of the trading post ahead. A squat, thatched structure half buried in snow, smoke curling from its chimney like an exhausted sigh. You push forward, eager for even the smallest bit of shelter. The door creaks open, and warm, smoky air rolls out to greet you. You step inside and immediately feel your frozen face begin to thaw painfully. The trader, a broad-shouldered man with a beard that looks like it has survived every winter since the dawn of time, nods at you. "Road's rough," he says, which is the medieval equivalent of "boy, that was a nightmare out there, huh?" You exchange small talk, the kind of reluctant chit-chat winter travelers use while defrosting. Then you get down to business. Salt, nails, twine, and unbelievably he has dried apples. You nearly weep with joy. You trade what you brought, mostly wool, a few spare tools, and a jar of pickled something you refuse to eat anyway, and pack your supplies carefully. After a few minutes of warmth, you step back outside. The cold slaps you again, like winter reminding you who's boss. But your spirits are higher now. Supplies secured, dried apples acquired, life improved by approximately 47%. The journey back isn't easier, but it feels lighter. Maybe because you have something sweet to look forward to, or maybe because heading home always feels safer. You slip only twice, fall once, curse 3 times, PG-13, but very heartfelt. And by the time you see the familiar outline of your house, your legs feel like damp kindling, and your toes feel like rumors. You stumble inside, drop your pack, and collapse onto the bench near the hearth. The fire warms your body. The relief warms your soul. Winter travel is rough, exhausting, and occasionally humiliating. But you survived the road, and that's no small thing. By the time you've thawed out from your winter trek, and the feeling has finally returned to your toes, well, most of your toes, you're ready to sink back into the familiar rhythm of indoor winter life. But something shifts over the next few days. Maybe it's the way the clouds break just long enough to spill a rare beam of sunlight onto the snow. Maybe it's the faint laughter drifting from a neighbor's house. Or maybe it's the presence of those precious dried apples sitting smugly in your cupboard. Whatever the cause, you feel it. A flicker of winter joy. Not the booming, festival-style joy of summer, but small, delicate moments that brighten the grey season like sparks rising from the hearth. You notice it first one morning when you step outside and the snow has stopped. The sky is pale blue, the wind is mercifully gentle, and sunlight glimmers across the drifts like scattered silver. The cold hasn't gone anywhere, of course. It still nips at your cheeks and tries to move into your boots rent-free, but the brightness feels like a blessing after weeks of iron-grey skies. You close your eyes and let the sun rest on your face, just long enough to remember what warmth could feel like. A mainstream historical fact pops into your head. Winter feasts, small or large, were deliberately placed to boost morale, break monotony, and mark time. Candlemas, midwinter gatherings, communal meals, even humble celebrations tied to no official holiday, all served as reminders that life continued even under snow and ice. And now, as you stretch your stiff limbs in the sudden sunlight, you understand why. Joy doesn't just help you survive winter, it keeps you human. Later that day, you carry a bundle of firewood across the yard, humming a tune you haven't thought about since autumn. It's off-key, but pleasantly so. The kind of humming that suggests your brain is slightly defrosting. As you round the corner, you hear children laughing nearby, loud, chaotic, happy. You peek around the barn to find them rolling snowballs into uneven, lumpy shapes. One shouts triumphantly that his creation is the mighty Lord of Winter, which looks more like a snow potato with twigs for arms, but you admire the enthusiasm. They wave you over, asking if you'll judge a snow creature contest. You glance at your woodpile, then at their hopeful faces, then at the snow potato. Responsibility can wait. You wander through their frosty little gallery of creatures. Snow goats, snow dragons, a snowman who looks like he's seen too much, and one disturbingly accurate snow chicken. You assign each of them a category: most intimidating, least likely to survive sunrise, best use of twigs, and so on. They cheer, satisfied, and for the first time in weeks, you laugh so hard your breath fogs the air in rapid bursts. On your way back inside, you think of a quirky tidbit. You once heard that some medieval villagers believed winter joy could strengthen the soul, keeping melancholy from seeping in through the long nights. You used to think that sounded dramatic. Now, you're not so sure. That evening, you take out your dried apples. You decide to ration them carefully because they're precious, but tonight deserves one. Just one. A small slice, sweet and chewy, tasting faintly of summer sunlight captured and saved. You sit by the fire, savoring every tiny bite as if it's a festival unto itself. The next day brings another small delight. A neighbor stops by with a jug of warm, spiced ale. Not because there's an occasion, but because they accidentally made too much. You know it wasn't an accident. Nothing involving spices is an accident. You share the drink beside the fire, talking about nothing and everything the winter so far, the repairs you still need to make, the absurdly loud rooster that thinks dawn begins at midnight. The conversation is easy, the warmth welcome. Historians still argue whether medieval villagers experienced winter as a gloomy season or one filled with communal warmth. You sip your ale, listening to your neighbor recount a ridiculous story involving a stubborn goat. You know exactly which goat, and you think, it's both. Winter is cold and cruel and endless, but it also forces people closer, encouraging little bursts of joy to slip through the cracks. Over the next few days, those tiny joys keep appearing like shy animals emerging from the forest. A clear morning where the sky blooms pink and gold. A surprise loaf of bread from a neighbor grateful you helped repair their fence. A moment of rare silence when the village feels suspended in soft white peace. A sunny patch by the window where you sit, legs tucked under you, basking like a contented lizard. A familiar song hummed while you spin wool, the notes curling around the room like a warm scarf. Even the chores feel lighter in these moments. You catch yourself smiling at your stubborn donkey when he nudges your shoulder for attention. You find the goat's chaos slightly more charming. You tuck a sprig of evergreen above your hearth, not for protection this time, but simply because it looks nice. The sun doesn't last long, of course. It never does in winter. But the brief glimmers of light, warmth, laughter, and sweetness leave small embers in your chest. And in winter, embers matter. They carry you through the cold, they pierce the gloom. They spark hope in places where days have grown short and heavy. You pull your cloak tighter around your shoulders, sip the last of your ale, and let yourself smile softly into the fire. Winter may be long, but these little joys remind you that it isn't empty. It happens quietly at first, so quietly that you don't notice until the moment you're sitting by the fire, staring at a pot of stew that's more warm water with floating ambitions than anything, resembling food. You tilt the ladle, watch a single lonely carrot slice drift by like a little orange lifeboat, and feel a sinking truth settle into your stomach. Deep winter has arrived. Not the early winter of crisp mornings and the occasional cheerful snowfall. Not the midwinter of shared work and cautious optimism. No, this is the part of the season where everything feels stretched thin. Your supplies, your energy, your patience, and your resolve. Deep winter is the long, colourless hallway between "we've survived so far and we're not out yet," and today you feel it pressing in from all sides. The fire burns lower than you'd like it has to. Wood is running low, and though you've been careful, the cold has demanded more fuel than you planned. A mainstream historical fact presses into your thoughts. Late winter scarcity was common across medieval Europe, especially for families without large land holdings. Grain stores dwindled, preserved meats ran low, and even firewood carefully rationed could become precariously scarce. The phrase, "hungry months," wasn't poetic, it was literal. You stand and cross the room, opening your cupboard. Inside, your supplies stare back at you with dwindling enthusiasm. 2 onions, a handful of barley, 1 dried apple slice, which you are absolutely, definitely saving for a crisis-level low. A jar of pickled something that you've been pretending doesn't exist. You close the cupboard slowly, almost tenderly, like tucking in a sleeping child you really, really need to stay asleep. Outside, the wind howls. Not the crisp, playful wind from earlier in the season. This is a low, mournful wail that slips through every crack and seam, carrying with it a cold that feels older than time. You hear the shutters rattle, the roof creak, a faint scuttling sound that is either a mouse or winter itself trying to move in rent-free. You sigh and brace yourself. Time to check on the animals again, and your morale, which is currently hanging on by a thread you spun 2 weeks ago. You step outside. The cold hits you like a disgruntled snow troll. The air is sharp, slicing across your skin, even through your layers. Snowflakes drift, not in the soft, dreamy way they did earlier in the season, but in a thin, constant curtain, steady, relentless, whispering, "Still here. Not leaving. Don't get any ideas." You trudge toward the barn, each step heavier than the last. The snow has hardened into uneven ridges, making your footing unpredictable. At one point, your foot slips into a hidden hollow. You don't fall, but you do invent a new full-body flail move you're certain would impress absolutely no one. You mutter a PG-13 oath at the snow and press on. Inside the barn, the animals greet you with subdued sounds. They're tired too. The cow lifts her head slowly. The goats bleat half-heartedly. Even the chickens, normally chaotic, bundles of feathers and unsolicited opinions, seem quieter, clustered together for warmth. You check their water frozen again and break the ice with the weariness of someone who has done this too many times in the last few weeks. You feed them carefully, measuring every handful, every flake of hay, every scrap of grain. Winter isn't generous, so you can't be either. A quirky tidbit surfaces in your memory. Some medieval villagers believed that during deep winter, animals could understand human speech more clearly, and talking to them kindly could keep them strong. You glance at your cow. You glance at yourself. You sigh. "Hang in there," you mutter. The cow blinks slowly. You take it as agreement. When you step back outside, the cold feels even sharper, as if the weather has been doing push-ups while you were inside. You pull your scarf tighter and hurry home, eager for even the illusion of warmth. Inside, the fire sputters, a tired imitation of its usual self. You feed it a small log, carefully measured, because running out of wood now would be the medieval equivalent of rage-quitting winter. You sit close, feeling the heat seep into your front while your back remains stubbornly cold. The long hours stretch in front of you, heavy as the sky. This is the season where time feels stuck each day, blending into the next, each night longer than the last. You occupy yourself however you can, mending a tiny tear in your mitten, sorting your tools, staring at the wall with the contemplative intensity of someone philosophizing about the meaning of existence. or at least the meaning of the pickled mystery jar. Historians still argue whether deep winter melancholy was recognized in medieval times or simply endured without a name. But you feel it, an emotional frost settling in as surely as the physical one. You poke the fire, watching sparks rise and vanish. The crackle steadies you just enough. Eventually, the heaviness shifts, not gone, but manageable. You take a deep breath, letting the warmth from the hearth push back against the cold, creeping into your bones. You remind yourself that this stretch, this slow and weary part of winter, is temporary. It always is. You stand, stretch your limbs, and pull your cloak on again. Tomorrow, you'll ration the grains more carefully. Tomorrow, you'll check the woodpile twice. Tomorrow, you'll think of a recipe involving half an onion and a powerful imagination. Tonight, you let yourself rest beside the fire, listening to the wind rage outside while the heat brushes your face. Winter may be wearing you down, but you're not done yet. You're stubborn, and stubbornness is a kind of warmth all its own. You wake the next morning to an unfamiliar sensation: silence. Not the heavy, brooding winter silence that usually presses against your shutters like a bored giant, but a softer, almost hesitant stillness. You lift your head, blink groggily, and realize something else. The air inside your home doesn't feel quite as sharp. Your breath still fogs, but faintly. Your blanket feels a little less necessary, and the shadows in the room have shifted, touched by a gentler light. You pull yourself upright, joints creaking, and shuffle to the door. Your fingers fumble with the latch, groggy, stiff, half expecting the usual slap of bitter cold. But when you push the door open, you stop short. The world looks different. Not warm, never warm, but softened. The sky, instead of its usual steely grey, has a pale blush to it, sunlight diffused through thin clouds with a warmth you can almost imagine. The snow sparkles rather than sulks. The air carries a quiet drip, drip, drip somewhere in the distance, like the world is thawing in tiny, careful increments. And just like that, you realize winter has loosened its grip, not released it, not fully, but eased it, just enough for hope to nudge its way back into your ribcage. You take a step outside, boots crunching on snow that feels slightly slushy at the edges. The wind is still cold, but less vicious, like it's grown tired of bullying you. For the first time in what feels like years, your cheeks sting only mildly. A mainstream historical fact surfaces. Medieval people marked the first signs of thaw not with celebration, but with caution. A warming day didn't mean winter was ending, it meant winter was changing forms. Melting snow could turn roads into rivers of mud. Ice breaking on rivers brought danger to crossings, and fluctuating temperatures could sicken livestock or rot stored food. Still, humans have always recognized this moment, the gentle shift, when the world hints that hardship is no longer deepening, only lingering. You take a careful walk around your home, checking the roof, the walls, the woodpile. Snow slides off the eaves in soft plops, revealing the dark thatch beneath. Tiny rivulets trace paths along the edges of your house. You inhale deeply, it smells like damp earth, smoky chimneys, and the faintest whisper of spring. You head toward the barn, and even the animals seem to sense the shift. The goats bleat more energetically, their breath misting in excited bursts. The cow shifts from hoof to hoof, impatient for fresh air. The chickens strut with unusual enthusiasm, pecking at exposed patches of soil like it's a royal feast. You break their water ice, still there, still stubborn but thinner than yesterday, more cooperative. Don't get too excited, you warn them as you haul hay. We all know winter loves a comeback. They ignore you completely. Inside the barn, you hear a faint tapping hitting the roof in irregular rhythms, the distinctive sound of snow, loosening, slipping, falling in clumps. You glance up warily. The last thing you need is an avalanche of slush landing squarely on your head. You step back outside, scanning the landscape. The snowbanks have softened, rounded at the edges like melting candle wax. The trees look less burdened, branches rising slightly from their icy slump, and the distant hills carry streaks of dark earth breaking through white. A quirky tidbit drifts into your mind. Some medieval villagers believed that the first thaw was caused not by the sun, but by underground spirits waking from their winter sleep and warming the soil from below. People would sometimes place an ear to the ground to listen for the stirring. You crouch purely for historical accuracy, of course, and place your hand against the snow-covered earth. All you feel is cold. But in that cold is something gentler than before. As you straighten, your neighbor trudges by, giving you a weary but hopeful nod. Feels different. "Today," he says, voice rough from winter air. You nod back. No one calls it spring, not yet, but everyone feels the subtle rearrangement of the season. A loosening. A shift. You spend the afternoon tending to chores that feel slightly easier, not because they are, but because the air itself feels kinder. You patch a section of the barn wall where frost warped the wood. You gather scattered branches that fell during storms. You check the cellar again, mentally recalculating how long the remaining onions and barley might last, now that the hardest stretch seems maybe behind you. Historians still argue whether medieval farmers truly believed they could feel the seasons turning, or if hindsight romanticized these moments. But as you move through the day, you know one thing for certain. Your body senses the change before your mind admits it. You move more lightly. You breathe more freely. You allow yourself the tiniest spark of optimism. By late afternoon, the sky actually shows streaks of gold, thin, delicate, but undeniably warm in color. You stand outside, face tilted toward the light, letting your eyes half close as you soak in the fragile beauty. Meltwater drips from the roof, pattering a soft rhythm. A bird chirps somewhere just once, a single bright note, and you freeze, wondering if you imagined it. A bird. In winter. You grin. Back inside, you light the hearth with one less log than usual, confident it will be enough tonight. Another sign. You prepare your evening meal, thinner than you'd prefer but warm enough, and sit beside the fire, letting your bones loosen. The walls seem less tight, the air less stale, the quiet less heavy. Tomorrow could bring another storm. Deep winter isn't done until it's done. But tonight, with the fire casting steady glow and the world outside dripping itself back into motion, you let your shoulders drop. The thaw has begun. Not victory, but promise. Not warmth, but the whisper of warmth. Not spring, but the memory of it returning. A small, stubborn smile tugs at your lips as you stare into the fire. Winter hasn't ended, but something has shifted, and you feel it, deep in your bones. The next morning arrives with a soft brightness that you almost don't trust. You blink awake, expecting the familiar chill, the stiff blanket, the scratch in your throat, but something is different. The air is still cold, yes, but not the biting cold of deep winter. It's gentler, almost thoughtful, like the season has finally taken a breath and decided it might be time to ease its grip. You sit up slowly, feeling the soreness in your muscles, the earned kind, the kind that says you've survived another long stretch of winter's relentless demands. You move to the door, open it just a crack, and let the morning spill in. Pale gold light, a faint drizzle of meltwater dripping from the thatch, and the smell, the smell of damp earth finally waking from its frosted slumber. It hits you with the wave of nostalgia, reminding you of seasons you barely dared remember during the harshest weeks. You step outside fully, boots sinking into snow that has softened into heavy, wet clumps. The world looks like it's exhaling. Snowbanks slump, water trickles in thin streams, and patches of dark soil appear like shy revelations. Winter isn't gone, not even close, but the edges have softened, its voice quieter now, its weight a little lighter on your shoulders. You take a slow breath and allow yourself to think about something you haven't imagined in months. What comes after all this? The season has carved lessons into you, hard ones, tender ones, unexpected ones. You feel them in your hands, in your back, in your quiet moments by the fire. Lessons about endurance, about preparation, about patience, even when patience feels like a luxury. A mainstream historical fact drifts into your thoughts. Medieval life was shaped by cycles, each season a teacher with its own demands, rewards, and warnings. Winter, especially, was not simply endured, it shaped identity, community, and rhythm. It reminded people of their vulnerability, but also of their resourcefulness. You wander to the barn, and the animals greet you with an energy you haven't seen in weeks. The goats bleat insistently, as if accusing you of controlling the weather and finally deciding to be reasonable. The cow nudges your arm with surprising enthusiasm. Even the chickens seem brighter, scratching at newly exposed patches of earth like they've discovered lost treasure. You break the ice on their water still frozen, but thin now, and feel that small victory spark warm satisfaction in your chest. You toss hay into the feeders, noticing the animals eat more eagerly, as though they too sense the change in the air. The barn feels lighter, less claustrophobic. For the first time, the scent of hay overpowers the lingering smell of cold. You run your hand down the donkey's neck, and he lets out a long, contented snort that sends warm puffs of air curling into the chill. A quirky tidbit crosses your mind. Some villagers believed that animals could sense the exact moment winter began to lose its power. They'd watch their livestock for signs: restless pacing, sudden playfulness, noisy morning greetings. You smile at the thought. Maybe there's truth in it. Maybe animals simply know more than you give them credit for. As you step back outside, your boots squish in slush, and you think even this sound feels like progress. The air carries a faint birdsong, faint, hesitant, as though the bird is warming up after a long silence. You pause, listening. The single note feels like a seed of hope planted in your chest. You spend the afternoon doing something strange for winter, walking without bracing yourself. Not quite leisurely, winter never allows that, but without the deep winter urgency. You check the edge of the garden where rows will someday grow again. You test the soil with your boot, finding it still stiff, still frozen in places, but yielding along the top. You let your gaze wander across the fields, where spring will return in its own slow, stubborn time. Historians still argue whether medieval people felt the shifting seasons more intensely than we do. But standing here, breathing air that smells like thawing life, you think the answer is clear. When everything you have depends on the land, the light, the soil, the weather, how could you not feel every change deep in your bones? You walk back home, cloak damp along the edges, feet wet but warm. You push the door open and step into the gentle glow of the hearth, the fire small but steady. You feed it a single log, not out of fear, not out of rationing panic, but simply because you can. You sit on the bench, stretch your legs, and let your mind drift over the long winter behind you. The cold mornings, the frozen water buckets, the rationed food, the snowstorms that erased paths, the strange, quiet nights, the moments of fear, the unexpected joy, the neighbours laughing over shared ale, the children's snow creatures. The one stubborn goat who acted like winter was invented purely for her entertainment. It all folds together into a season that shaped you, exhausting, demanding, humbling, but somehow grounding. And now, as the first fragile hints of warmth whisper at your windows, you feel something else rise inside you. Readiness. Not for spring, not yet, but for whatever comes next. Winter taught you resilience, connection, patience. It taught you to find comfort in small sparks, beauty in quiet moments, strength in repetition. You take one final slow breath, let your shoulders drop, and watch the fire glow with a steady, hopeful light. Winter is not finished, but it's fading. And you somehow, wonderfully, are still here. You survived the long cold, and the world is beginning to thaw. And now, with the last echoes of winter quieting beyond your door, let everything inside you begin to soften. Let the fire in your mind burn lower, slower, more gently, until only warm embers remain. You've walked through the cold, the dark, the snow, and the long, stretching nights. You've kept the hearth alive, kept yourself moving, kept the rhythm of survival steady even when the world felt frozen in place. And now, in this quiet space, you can release the weight you carried through all those imagined months. Let your breath lengthen, unhurried, like meltwater drifting beneath thin ice. Feel the warmth settle along your shoulders, your back, your legs, easing them open the way. Early sunlight slowly unfastens the grip of winter across the land. You can sense the stillness around you deepening, not the sharp stillness of frozen nights, but the soft stillness of a world preparing to wake. A gentler quiet, a kinder quiet. Your thoughts loosen, drifting like tiny flakes caught in a lazy breeze, settling wherever they choose. There's no need to hold on to any of them. Just let them float, let them dim, let them soften at the edges. You are safe here, warm here. The long journey through snow and shadow is behind you, fading like footsteps covered by fresh drifts. And as the story closes, imagine the glow of the hearth fading to a soft golden hush. Imagine the last log burning slowly down into a cushion of embers. Imagine your body growing heavier, calmer, more at ease with each slow breath. Everything is quiet now. Everything is gentle. Everything is warm.